Hey, Aaron the Metal Theologian. So I'm kind of trying to think of really cool things to say about this, but the real sort of impetus for this right now is, I spent a lot of time on this channel talking about the Swedish magic sort of over the last year or two, and that's really a thing. You know what I mean? I think you can even quantify it to a certain degree. I don't like to because I don't want to spoil the magic, right? But like when you think of like Swedish magic, if you're going to try and put that into words, like it really, there's a certain sort of set of attributes, it's like it's going to be sort of epic but like heavy on melody, melodic, you know what I mean, sort of heroic and epic but in a bright sort of uplifting way as opposed to like a dour way. That's where Candlemass was sort of an exception. So, but once you sort of get into that groove, you know it. And there are good Swedish bands that don't quite have that Swedish magic, you know what I mean? And there are bands that have that, a little bit of that Swedish magic that kind of suck too, but when it all gels, it's just perfect, man. And within the, sort of broadly speaking, the punk realm, man, who has some fucking magic is Cleveland. And it's been a while since I heard a record where it jumped out at me the way it has with this one. So this is, if you're interested in this, there's a channel called Bill's Box of Sound. If you watch me, you probably know Bill. Yeah, and Bill's a really good channel too. Totally worth subscribing to. We're not like buddies, like we've never been tight, like the way I hang out with like Eric Bauer or like Bananas from Grown Man Record Night. But I've always liked Bill a lot, so totally subscribe to his channel. He's in Cleveland. Actually, I'll tell you a fucking story about Bill's Box of Sound, which actually isn't really a story about Bill's Box of Sound at all. It's about shit going on in my head, but those are the funniest stories sometimes. So when I was working at the record store, I was working at the Record Exchange in Lakewood for about 3 years, for around 90 to 93-ish, give or take. And I'd already discovered Can at that point, and I maybe had gotten into Noi too, but I think I just knew the name at that point. So we had a regular customer who was cool, who who had good taste in music, who I sort of hung out with and shit. We were talking about this shit, and he asked if I knew Faust, and I totally didn't. So he went and made me a tape, okay? And on one side of this tape was fucking the first Faust album, and then some Cluster shit, and then the other side was the Punishment of Luxury album. So those records, like Faust, the Cluster just sort of melded in with everything else when I was listening to that tape when I was a kid back then. But like the Faust and the Punishment of Luxury just sort of like have this juxtaposition in my head sort of eternally ever since then, right? Anyway, so he made me this tape and it fucking blew me away, right? That first Faust, just it was an incredible album. It was one of those really sort of changed how I looked at music, right? And I don't remember this guy's name anymore, right? But my mental image, like going back, 30 years in my memory banks, sort of like the attributes I sort of associate with this guy, he kind of looks a lot like Bill from Bill's Box of Sound. And the biggest problem is I think Bill and I are closer in age. I think this guy was more, I think he was older than me by, not a lot, but a few years. More than Bill, as if Bill's even older than me at all, which I wouldn't bet money on. So, yeah, so anyway, like after 25, 30 years or whatever, when I got around to it, I actually told Bill about this and just fucking asked him if he remember giving some kid a fucking Faust tape at the Record Exchange in Lakewood. He was like, no. So apparently it wasn't him. And the mystery will probably never be solved, but it isn't really much of a mystery anyway. It's just sort of a funny thing to come back around. And it's plausible, because the idea that someone who also lives a little deeper in the Cleveland suburbs would be at the Record Exchange in Lakewood, totally plausible. And bullshitting about a band like that. And does Bill have good taste in music? Like the kind of taste in music where he might have been ahead of me with some of these bands and put me on to them, like when I was younger? Totally plausible. I'm telling you, the biggest problem, other than the fact that like he says it didn't happen, like other than that, the second best reason not to believe that he was the same guy is just that I think we're too close in age. Anyway, it's been a long time since I've heard this kind of Cleveland magic on a fucking record. And apparently this is an old band of Bill's. I don't really know anything about it. I grabbed this thing just to check it out, to sort of support the channel. I mean, that might be kind of cool, but I thought the name was kind of stupid. And most of my favorite Cleveland stuff is like late 70s, maybe into the early 80s a little bit, which is late for that. But dude, all like my sort of reservations, I was like, oh, well, I'll just get it because of Bill. I'm telling you, you don't need those fucking reservations, man, because this record is really good. There's a big write-up on the back, which, I sort of skimmed it, which is an intense read by my standards these days. I almost never read liner notes. Actually, that's not quite true. I scanned this for some other shit. We'll talk about that too. Anyway, there's a lot of sort of made of them sort of having been kids, and you know, I was gonna say at least 2 or 3 bands, but I think I was just a guest with one of those bands. So like I might have been like on an early Big New Plaid demo or something like that, because I was friends with Steve when he was like before he actually made a 45 and shit. When he was like a kid in high school, and I remember in his fucking rehearsal room he had his drum set and his metal drum set. And the metal drum set was just like a few like fucking like those old metal garbage cans with the lids and shit. So like we'd be playing and he'd like play the drums and he'd just like get over and walk up to the metal drums and just like start throwing them around and shit. Yeah, Steve was a funny guy too, man. Steve from Big New Plaid. Now, if you've never heard of Big New Plaid, I don't blame you. You can investigate if you want, but I think Big New Plaid was kind of a way of life more than it was a band. Anyway, they kind of make a lot about them sort of having been a couple kids. There are a couple songs like that sort of on here, right? Like the Rad Motorbike Chick kind of feels like a jokey song, you know, and there are a couple others. But when they settle into this groove, like they're not afraid to do something that like threatens to be corny with the keyboards, which ends up actually sounding perfect. You know what I mean? They settle in these hot grooves like this. They do that weird shit with the microphone distortion. It just has that sort of darkness, that sort of like, I don't know, wintry quality. You know, I think of Cleveland Magic, I think of slush. You know what I mean? It's like people who are like, oh, snow is so beautiful. They're not thinking about slush. You see a lot of slush in Cleveland. It's dirty and it's kind of gross. And that's kind of what I think of. Like slush when it's sort of on the frozen side. But the thing is, as much as slush is kind of annoying in real life, except when you're a little kid, it's kind of fun to kick it. On record, it's great. Yeah, I mean, when these guys are really on, I like this at least as much as some of like those really early Residence demos. So that's pretty high praise. Admittedly, some of that stuff I think they released a little bit more than they should have when it comes to these early Residence tapes they've unearthed and shit. And some of that shit is like prime Residence, right? And I mean, you know, do I think Spudlock is as good as the Residence? No, sorry, Bill, I can't. Yeah, there's a particular one over here I'm gonna preview. I'm kind of counting on the fact that I can just play some of this shit while I'm fucking hyping it. Yeah, there's this one fucking track in the middle of side one. I was sort of singing like how I was doing something, so I'm just gonna let it run for a bit and see if I can find it. Well, there we go, man. I just dropped the needle on there in the middle of the side. That's a fucking great groove, man. The guitar distortion is just right. And there's those weird electronics in there. Dude, this is so fucking good. I would take this over like 90% of the records that I hear. So like, if you're thinking, yeah, maybe I should grab that Spudlock because it's, you know, we're sort of friends, kind of friend band. Dude, don't worry about it, man. This kind of singing style too, it actually, the Devo influence is pretty obvious on this track, you know. It says on the back you're influenced by Devo. I mean, surprise. But it doesn't sound like a Devo ripoff. It sounds like there's some Devo influence as far as how he's singing, you know what I mean? But it's like, this is fucking great, dude. It's just such a good record, man. I'm really like stoked to come across this, you know. It took me basically knowing half the band, more or less, to discover it. But goddamn, dude. So here's the other thing I was going to say about this one, actually. Yeah, I'm glad to see that they thank Chaz Smith from his radio show, WCSB. That's the reason I look a little closer to Cleveland records, especially from when I'm about the right age and I always want to see who I know on these things, you know. And it's not like I'm tight with most of these people in that, but Chaz and I were pretty friendly for a while. We were in a choral group together at Cleveland State. And so we ended up hanging out a fair bit. And I remember, I've probably told this story before, but like we were talking about music and shit. He actually put me on to Suicide. If I remember correctly. He might have been the one who put me on a Suicide. Yeah, but he told me about his band Venus Envy, who I've hyped in a relatively recent video, and I hope y'all bought it, because it's still less than $10. It's better than 90% of your collection. But then, yeah, he was in the Pagans, too, and I was like, holy shit. But Chaz was cool, and he was sort of, actually, Chaz was really cool. Like, if you're like Gen X and you have that sort of like appreciation for just like being cool, Chaz fucking had that cool fucking drums. just naturally. So apparently he's not with us anymore. We lost touch when I moved to San Francisco. We weren't like tight anyway, but we hung out and shit. We were definitely friendly. And yeah, apparently he's not with us anymore. But Chaz was sort of a fixture in sort of the Cleveland scene. So you see his name on these sorts of records. So shout out to Chaz Smith. So other than fucking Spudlock, which just came in the mail today. God, this is so fucking good, dude. I pulled out a couple Whitesnake albums. And I don't even really know why. I was like wanting to hear some like older hard rock for some reason. It just seemed like it might scratch. I was gonna say the itch, but I'm not even sure what the itch was. Anyway, I listened to some of it. I realized I'm really kind of on a David Coverdale kick. And I don't think this has ever happened before, but I'm just I kind of did this with Dio a couple weeks ago. Like I sort of mentioned in the last video, I think, but I might not have made a big deal out of it because, everybody loves Dio. But like David Coverdale, people don't usually get on a video and say, I'm a really big fucking David Coverdale fan. And honestly, dude, through like my teens, not all my teens, but through most of my teens and probably more of my 20s than not, I kind of thought he was a chode, Not like personally, it's just, he's following Ian Gillan, right? What are you gonna do? In Deep Purple, he's the guy who replaced Ian Gillan. He had a different style. He brought all this weird R&B shit, him and Glenn Hughes both, that totally changed the sound of the band. And I wasn't like there in 1974 when this change took place, but sort of retrospectively going through the catalog, I was like, yeah, man, this shit sucks compared to what they were doing 2 years earlier. Well, hopefully, if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, that's exactly the sort of statement that I'm going to change my mind about, more than once over the life of this channel, realistically. But right now, I've decided not only that David Coverdale is just fine, but that David Coverdale is actually kind of fantastic. And it's funny, I started doing some research for this, right? So I listened to... This all kind of started because I talked a friend of mine into buying this record like a week ago. Ready and Willing. Sure, for like $10 to look this up. He's like, oh, is that cool? It's like, I really like that record. I haven't played it in a while, but this is like half Deep Purple on this fucking record anyway at this point. But anyway, this is a really sort of easy to enjoy, like sort of hard rocker from like 1980-ish. Definitely, it's still a hard rock record. It's not an early metal record yet, records from 80, 81, people say have one foot in the 70s. This one definitely has both feet in the 70s. But that said, it's very rockin', it's very solid. If you like hard rock, you're pretty much gonna like that record. These earlier ones that are bluesier, though, are the ones that I'm kind of digging more, man. The ones where he just sort of swaggers a little bit more. Dude, this record's so scratched the itch. And I was listening to this going, man, I don't know if this is really any more hip than like Foghat, But something, I'm not in the mood to listen to Deep Purple right now. I don't feel like listening to Judas Priest. I don't feel like listening to Genesis. How about this? Little Devo there too, right? But the sound is so cool, you hear that? Like that weird shimmery shit on the top there. And that silly little call and response with the, I think it's the bass and the vocals there. Awesome, man. It's so good. And that's why the Cleveland shit is cool, man. I mean, a lot of bands do this. It's always cool. But you can take just a few simple components and then, like, add some magic to it. That's some of the greatest music you can make, man. These guys remind me of the Styrenes in places, too. That's more high praise, because the Styrenes are pretty fucking great. I like these guys better than the Styrenes a lot of the times with the Styrenes. Anyway. So Love Hunter's really a pretty corny record, but, man... I was so into this. In fact, yeah, and then I put on Trouble. And dude, I was so into this one. This one has a Beatles cover in the middle of side one, and it didn't even bother me. Fucking Day Tripper. It's so funny that they were a 6-piece band. It's like, you listen to this record, and you're like, you needed that many fucking people to do that? But I don't care, because these records are just fucking fun. And just easy to listen to, and just easy to just sort of sit back and enjoy, you know what I mean? I think it's like FM radio, Maybe this is what happens when you get older. So, because by way of like sort of my research for this video, if I was going to sit here and talk about David Coverdale, I was like, well, I've got to listen to this. Actually, I played all my fucking Deep Purple Coverdale records too. I played Burn like yesterday, and I was really into the songs like Might Just Take Your Life that I used to hate. Or what's the other fucking. What's the other one? And then we'll go about. We'll see if we can rehabilitate Stormbringer. Because that thing is really a fucking piece of shit. Where's Burn? I hope I didn't put it away. There it is. You Fool No One. Okay, that's the one. I used to hate that fucking song, dude. And that was like right on. What's going on here? Still kind of corny. Mistreated, man. There used to be a channel. The guy's name is Garner, and he's changed his channel name a few times. Last time I saw it, it was called High Octane Revival. I don't know if he still uploads or not. But that fucking guy, I swear, is the reason I got into blues rock at all. Because I watched a lot of his videos when I first started my channel. Because he was into a lot of the same kind of like German shit that I was, like the 70s shit. But then he was also into like the blues rock shit. I gave Savoy Brown another chance of all bands. I was like, man, I really like this, you know. So that opened up like Fleetwood Mac to me, like those early Fleetwood Mac records, the Peter Green ones. And it really kind of opened up Whitesnake to me too, you know, because that whole bluesy thing he was doing, I could really sort of get into. So I think Mistreated might have sort of prepared the way for that. But ever since that door sort of opened, that mental door, I think that's a great song. In fact, I even enjoy Dio doing it on that fucking Rainbow record. All right, so this is I've said this before, but like this record, fucking Come Taste the Band. What a dated cover. But Come Taste the Band. If you forget that this record says Deep Purple on it, this is a fantastic 70s hard rock record. It's moody, but the ballads don't suck. The instrumentals don't. There's only one little instrumental. It doesn't drag on. It's like afterwards you go, oh, I guess there was a little instrumental in there, wasn't there? It's not like, fuck, I wish he'd stop already. You know what I'm saying? And I swear, Love Child is one of the best rockers they ever wrote. Lady Luck is a fun song, though, man. Getting Tighter. Drifter's pretty good. And you know something? I really like You Keep On Moving. Yeah, this is kind of the corny one, you know? Don't let this scare you off, so this record's fucking great. Anyway, so the fucking Deep Purple record that's just fucking... The Coverdale one where you're just like, dude, that's pretty much Stormbringer. And that's because Stormbringer... Look, this is my copy that I've had since I was probably 20. I think it's the second copy. Like, I had one and I traded it away because I didn't like it. And then I was like, oh, it's a Deep Purple record. So I'm pretty sure I got this when I was working in the record store for, like, nothing. Like, maybe $3. So it's, like, kind of fucked up. And it's a big seam split. And I could have replaced this probably 100 times, but I never respected it enough to do so, you know? Because it's such a crappy record. The song Stormbringer is really good, and I really like the song Soldier of Fortune, which is actually a slow one on here, too. But, like, all the other songs on this one just seem so fucking... Like, you can't do it right with the one you love. God damn, dude. It's like, you know that fucking, There are those two really horrible Blue Oyster Cult songs I was talking about so much. I'm fucking spacing the titles of them. One of them is You Weren't the One I Was Looking For off of Spectres, but the other one was, No, I mean, it's on Mirrors, but there's one on Spectres that's even worse. I can't think of it. It's the one that sounds like a romantic song, if I'm remembering correctly. Anyway, that was like their song that's equivalent to that. It's fucking terrible. But some of the other ones on here, like Holy Man and like Lady Double Dealer, I'm like, you know, these songs aren't really all that bad, man. So I don't know. If I'm coming around on Stormbringer, maybe I'm just getting old. I mean, maybe it's to the point where you can't believe anything I say anymore because I'll just like everything no matter how shitty it is. I gotta put something else on. I'm gonna put this on for a minute. This is Turbo. No, fuck Turbo. You know why? Because that middle school guy just made a fucking Turbo video. So I'm not gonna put this on. Because fuck that guy. No, actually, that's fine. It's just... I'm just not doing it because it seems lame to do. I put this one on and said, this is Metal Mercy, The Unborn Child. And this is a Swedish one, I think. It might be Norwegian, but I'm pretty sure it's Swedish. It's a little late. It's 89. Yeah. So anyway, seriously, no shade at Metal School. I haven't watched that video yet, but I will. I was just kind of kidding. It just does seem kind of lame. But it's kind of funny because it's sort of it's really not a basic channel. Like it's a really advanced basic channel. You know what I mean? Because it does these overviews, and you like they definitely do the sort of the what are your best Iron Maiden records, sort of level stuff. But then they'll also do a feature on like Turbo from Poland, and I'm like, dude, you got to respect that. So, in fact, overall, honestly, in a way that that kind of makes me respect him even more, because he's making a more serious effort to bring in people who are new and actually sort of get them deeper into it than frankly I do. You know what I mean? That's kind of a bad habit. I kind of tend to assume everyone knows everything I do. So I just like talk and like say, well, of course you know like every single Foghat album. I actually don't know the first one, but it's like, the second one's boring, the third one's probably their best, the next couple are fun to sit down and listen to, and the hits are on Fool for the City, I think. And yeah, I don't know. The point is just stupid shit like that. Speaking of stupid shit like that, there's actually a YouTube channel I want to hype just a little bit. Because I like to do this sort of thing when I find channels that I'm interested in. And this guy did a stream last night and kind of had a rough night. It was actually a great stream. He had Kip Davis on. They were talking about, well, actually, they were talking about mythicism, and it kind of turned into a drama stream. So it's not the best example. But he deserves a break because this guy's making a valiant effort, and his channel is pretty small still. I mean, it's a little bigger than me, but only a little bigger than me. So, and like, I mean, he's an atheist. So, and it's not all religion. I tend to be more interested in the religious topics, and some of them are like, oh, here's a deconversion story or something like that, which can be interesting, but aren't so much it. But like, some of these are really good. He has really interesting guests on too, like I'm missing it. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, it's this Dennis R. MacDonald one where he talks about this idea of there having been this sort of like early Christianity that was centered in Jerusalem, like this sort of Ur-Christianity that was basically destroyed when the temple was destroyed in AD 70. And what developed into what eventually became modern Christianity was basically sort of the variations of it that have been dispersed around the Greek-speaking world through Paul's missions and that. So in other words, the people in the actual vicinity of Jesus who would have spoken Aramaic and all that, that was just completely wiped off the face of the earth. They're just gone, you know what I mean? Like the Hittites, and so we have these like Hellenic remnants, and that's why Christianity is so Greek. And that it's really interesting. I don't know if I buy it or not. I'm certainly not in any kind of position here to, debate the pros and cons as far as the merits of it, because I'm no expert. But I think it's a really interesting idea. It's like it's the sort of thing where whether you buy it or not, it opens up really interesting things to think about, In fact, part of why I think Jesus mythicism, if you don't know Jesus mythicism, there's just like a certain group of people who are out to demonstrate that Jesus never existed. And they tend to be they tend to be belligerent, frankly, is what it is. You know what I mean? They kind of have a bad reputation. It's not because they're arguments, it's because they tend to be belligerent. Now, their arguments may also be bad, but that's not why they have a bad reputation. And I don't care. I'd have a dog in that fight. But the reason why is because it seems like a silly thing to argue about. Because if you're a Christian, then you believe in Jesus as a matter of faith. That's a faith claim. And so all this stuff is off the table, right? The historicity in that's just playing games. You know what I mean? If it's a faith claim and it's something that works for you in your life and you believe it, that's great. You don't need to say, oh, well, and this guy actually existed and here's how we prove it. This is beside the point. That's just bullshit, That's playing games is what it's doing. On the other hand, if we take a naturalist view, as frankly I'm more inclined to, just being honest, and assume that these legends grew up and, this religion sort of grew out of it, It's very plausible that there was a teacher at the center of it named Jesus. You know what I mean? Now, if you take all the stories in the New Testament and assume they're all fiction, all attributes, at what point have you taken away so many that the question of a historical Jesus just becomes meaningless? You know what I mean? Like, I mean, the Aramaic equivalent of Jesus was a pretty common name back then, right? So it'd be like saying, oh, there's this guy named Steve in in the U.S. who was talking about this shit. It's like, yeah, was there a guy named Steve? Absolutely. You know what I mean? So there almost certainly was someone named Jesus. Does that person bear any relationship to what we might consider historical? It doesn't. The question doesn't really make sense, is what I'm trying to get at. And these are the sorts of things I think are interesting. So the channel's called Deep Drinks, all right? And if you enjoy that sort of thing, then check that out. And I'll talk about a couple more records before I hang this up, because I feel like an asshole otherwise, just rambling about all this extraneous shit. Although if I put you on a spud lock, I've done my job for today. Metal Mercy is really cool. I like this one a little bit more every time I hear it. It just has a really cool, like, it sounds like thrash was around. I mean, because it definitely fucking was by 89. Okay, but thrash is sort of around, but they want to play the straight ahead shit, but they're playing it a little bit faster because they're sort of being pulled along with the thrash a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, sort of like how bands always play their songs a little faster live. It's almost like that, but like across bands and on record, you know? I'm pretty sure there's a reissue of this kicking around. I'm pretty sure this is Swedish. But yeah, this is an original. And the reissue is like High Roller or maybe No Remorse or something like that. You can probably find it around. I mean, you could do a lot worse if you're just looking for little ghosts of something Swedish. Here's a much cornier Swedish one, man. Fucking Twilight Project. This is like Synthapalooza, this fucking thing. It's just like a smorgasbord. Actually, it's not really a smorgasbord. It's like two different synth sounds that this whole fucking record is covered with. But I really kind of love it. And, yeah, let's just fucking end a little bit of a Twilight Project here. Just because, like, we spent the whole first part of this video talking about, like, Cleveland bands and why Cleveland bands are cool and, like, people I know and all this sort of boiling down to how hip I am. So let's look right here at how hip I'm not. The label's pretty promising, though, isn't it? This is a total Merciful Metal record. Total Chromie D record. It's more of a Merciful Metal record than a Chromie D record, but if I were in a record store and they were both with me and there was one copy that's sitting there, I would expect them to fight over it. Listen to that shit. Hey. Can you hear that really? We might have gone past it too fast, but can you hear the really cheesy attack on the string sound, like the string preset in the synth? It was like before they perfected the technology to make it sound like a good bow attack. So it has this weird sort of like, not really a tremolo, but a weird sort of bend at the beginning to simulate that. It doesn't quite work. It just sounds corny as fuck. That's what we're talking about right here. That's the fucking Twilight Project. I really couldn't tell you why I don't hate this. Except that it's entertaining. And I think that's what people who get really into like gear and audiophile and all that and just the right pressings, I think that's what they fucking miss. Because the shit's entertaining, you know what I mean? You're supposed to enjoy it. Sort. You know, this record has 2 guys on the back, and the Wicca record has 2 guys on the back. You know the Canadian band Wicca with 2 Ks? And that record fucking rules too. That one's actually way better than this one. I wonder if that's like a thing though, if there are 2 guys in the band on a metal record. Sort of inexplicably 2 guys though, like why don't y'all have a drummer? That sort of thing. But maybe that's a good sign. I don't know, I'm gonna have to test this theory. Call it a working hypothesis for now. Okay, so anyway, thanks for watching. Hope it turned you on to some cool shit. Shout out to Bill's Box of Sound. And I hope y'all are doing great.